Today, we're going to talk football and in particular Spanish football. The two giant Spanish clubs, Real Madrid and Barcelona, have been the subject of much turbulence in recent times. For the past decade or more, they have dominated the European game and indeed delighted every football follower with their great teams. Madrid having won 3 successive Champions League, and of course Barcelona with Lionel Messi in particular being memorable to the extent that I don't think we'll ever forget, or anyone who's seen Messi will ever forget what they saw. The same of course applies to Cristiano Ronaldo. Now things have taken a turn for the worst, and we're joined from Barcelona by Richard Fitzpatrick, an Irish journalist working there, to get a read on their latest troubles. Richard, we should start with Barcelona, who had an amazing result. Granada beat them 2-0 at the weekend. Lionel Messi was in the team, recovering from injury. They're 7th or 8th place in the table. It's early days, of course, but things appear to be difficult.
They do. The word crisis has been bandied around liberally. It's probably the most overused word in the Spanish football lexicon, but there are very valid questions to ask about where Barca are headed, even though it is early in the season. They've only played 5 games in the league and had 1 game in the Champions League. But there are systemic problems there that have surfaced. They went to Granada at the weekend on Saturday. They lost 2-0. This is Granada as a club that won promotion. So they were playing second division football last season. I think they spent about 7 million in the transfer market over the summer. Barca would have spent hundreds of millions, obviously. And Barca put in the worst shift that's people are casting around. They can't remember when they were so poor. They had 1 shot on target. Ernesto Valverde admitted afterwards worse, they couldn't play. And the only player who kind of covered himself in any bit of glory was Frankie de Jong. But the rest of the team were very, very poor. And it's not an isolated performance. They are mid-table, but it historically is their worst start in the league in 25 years. Tellingly, they have fallen behind in 4 of those 5 games. They have the worst goals scored against them ratio in the league. So on the pitch, a lot of problems. And if you ran through the team, like obviously the defence is poor, having leaked all those goals. Up front, Messi has just returned from injury. He played the second half of the game, so that's a small mitigating factor. And they have had other injuries, Ousmane Dembele as well up front, and Luis Suarez missed a handful of games as well through injury. But Antoine Griezmann, their big money signing during the summer, hasn't fitted in yet. So that's a big worry, and there are other kind of factors involved in that situation, namely the whole saga with trying to get Neymar over the summer. That's who the senior players wanted, not Griezmann. But we could go into that at length. And then the big problem in the big picture is the midfield. Valverde has used 7 different players in midfield. Carlos Aleñá, an academy player, he played the first game, started the first game against Athletic Bilbao. He hasn't featured in the squad since. Even Rakitic has drifted in and out of the game, or out of the team, but he's generally out of favour. Busquets, Frankie de Jong, Arturo Vidal, Sergio Roberto, all these guys are vying for a place, and none of them are working. Barca's midfield used to be nailed on. It was always Busquets, Iniesta, Xavi, but that control is lost, and we would have seen that against Liverpool at Anfield. And one of the papers here, Diario AS, started their match report on Saturday or Sunday morning with every stadium is Anfield now for Barca. They can't perform away from home. They've gone 8 games without a win. And to lose to a lowly team like Granada is very, very worrying. And the press are hammering them, especially Valverde.
Yes, Valverde is in. Is it his second season, Richard, as coach? Third season. And the Anfield defeat, it was a hammering in the Champions League, I think, quarter-final? Semi-final, rather. The second leg defeat, 4-0 at Anfield. They don't appear, they appeared that night to be a spent force, and they don't appear to have got over it psychologically ever since.
Absolutely. The minute you open up a paper, it's all about Anfield. You know, the words I use, earthquake, most embarrassing defeat in history. To carry lead into that semi-final 3-0 up from the Camp Nou, and to be humiliated 4-0 at Anfield like that, overrun, has had huge reverberations. And the problem is that it wasn't an isolated defeat. They had suffered exactly the same the previous season. They went out in the quarter-final carrying a big lead from the Camp Nou, and they got hammered in Rome by Roma. And the year before, the same thing happened. They got murdered by Juventus in the quarterfinals in Turin. So like a player like Luis Suarez is getting fingered all the time. He hasn't scored an away goal in the Champions League in 4 seasons. So this problem in the Champions League, they're getting exposed. Is now carrying into the league domestically.
I mean, the position of Lionel Messi, I suppose, is key to everything. He's such a fabulous player, Richard, and he delivers all the time. That his sort of virtuosity has covered, it appears, in recent years, a multitude of failings around the team in defence, in midfield, and even with Suarez. He is just a phenomenal leader of that team. But if you think about them without him, you see there's not an awful lot left.
Yeah, he's papered over the cracks. 51 goals in 50 games last season, time and again. He dug them out of holes. I remember Sevilla, they went down twice last season away from home, managed to win 3-2. He got a hat-trick. He went back to the city a couple of weeks later. Similar circumstances, he thumped in another hat-trick, got a standing ovation from Betis supporters. So when he's not there, as he hasn't started the first 5 league games, you can see the problems that surface. And it goes back to, they don't have that control in midfield. Or when they had Neymar, there was another outlet he could. He was another player that would deliver on big games, as he did against Paris Saint-Germain in that famous comeback a couple of years ago. But he's gone, so it's left with Messi to do the delivery.
Do they have the money and the financial muscle to really compete with the big English clubs, and of course in the transfer market, and with Real Madrid, of course, who were able to spend 150 million on Eden Hazard in the close season, although that hasn't. We'll come on to Real Madrid in a few moments because I saw them lose to PSG last week, and they were very, very poor. Do Barcelona have the money to spend at the rate that you need to stay in contention for the Champions League effectively?
Yeah, in fairness, they do. Like, over the last 5 seasons, they have been spending a lot. The problem is they've been spending it in the wrong places. They've gone through 4 sporting directors in the last 4 years. This summer alone, they would have spent big on Griezmann, 120 million, Frankie de Jong, 85 million, Junior Firpo, a full-back they brought from Betis. He was at cause for the first goal in his first game at the weekend. The players that they bought in haven't been working out, but their spending is generally on a par, just a bit below over the last 5 years. The likes of Man City, or they definitely would have spent as much or more than Liverpool.
Right. What about Valverde? Now he came with a reputation of being a strong man. He clearly has, or at least had, the approval of Lionel Messi, which I think is necessary to get that job and keep it.
Yeah, he looks a beaten duck. It's difficult to see how he can come back from this. He's endured and weathered crisis before. After that defeat against Roma, after the defeat last spring against Liverpool, but to have a crisis so early in the season, his contract runs out at the end of the season with an option to extend another season. But it's September now, and they're calling for his head. After that defeat in Anfield, the board met on the Monday or Tuesday. Bartomeu, the president, persuaded them to hold on to Valverde. 2 or 3 weeks later, they lost the domestic cup final to Valencia. Another extraordinary board meeting. Again, Bartomeu backed him. That would have been the moment to sack him.
Yes.
Historically, the club or recently in recent history doesn't sack managers. The last time would have been back in 2003 with Louis van Gaal. But they decided to persevere with him. But that hangover from that defeat at Anfield, it's difficult to get over such a cataclysmic defeat. And the experience of Luis Enrique would be instructive. He was Valverde's predecessor. They've had a similar trajectory. Luis Enrique came in 2014. It was the summer that Luis Suarez joined the club, and they were very poor up to Christmas. He had a big blowout, Enrique, with Messi, and the first game back in January after a defeat to Real Sociedad. And the president, who was an interim president, Josep Bartomeu, he called a snap election for the summer. He fired the sporting director. Luis Enrique carried on. It was thought he would get sacked, but the squad pulled together in the end of the season with a triple. Following season, they did the double, and then this third season syndrome. Enrique couldn't motivate players. Something similar happened to Guardiola before him in his final season. They limped through the season. They got hammered by Paris Saint-Germain in the Champions League 4-0. And this was in March. Enrique announced that he was leaving at the end of the season. It galvanised the squad. They had that famous comeback win, but then they lost dramatically to Juventus in the next round, and he was gone in the summer. The same kind of sensations are there this season. That the club has only won twice previously, 3 league titles in a row. So Valverde really has his work cut out to kind of pull this team together now.
How influential is Lionel Messi in the club? I know his influence extends everywhere, even to having a contract, I think, that allows him to leave for nothing at the end of each season. How important is it that this great player is happy?
Yeah, it's a very pointed question. There was Messi rarely gives interviews. He does a few short TV interviews in his role in the Champions League and his role as captain. But he granted a sit-down interview with Diario Sport, one of the Catalan newspapers here, the week before last. And the big takeaway from the interview was that he said that he didn't think the board did enough to get Neymar during the summer. This has sent Bartomeu and the directors in the club running for cover.
I'll tell you what, Richard. I watched PSG on Sunday night, and Neymar was playing, and I'd pay a lot of money not to have him anywhere near my club, because he's more of a playboy now than a footballer. But it's interesting. He has a very close relationship with Lionel Messi and indeed with Suarez. The three of them got on famously.
Correct. Yeah, they have a WhatsApp group together, pretty intimate for players at that level. So Messi has mentioned this, and Suarez a couple of times now in interviews over the last few months, about how much they wanted Neymar to come back. So the club, it was a shambles. They went after Neymar in the summer. They didn't have the money to buy him. They had to get a €30 million loan out, or €35 million loan out, to get the Griezmann sale over the line. So they were proposing to Paris Saint-Germain, who they have very, very poor relations with, for several reasons, namely the fact that they filched Neymar from them 2 years ago.
Yeah.
But they were offering a trade of players, and they weren't even telling the players Ousmane Dembele was being offered in a trade, and he wasn't told about it. So that's left a cancer in the squad. There was up to 6 players offered by Barca. It's unknown whether, Paris Saint-Germain were looking for €300 million. They weren't going to do Barca any favours. They have this problem, all right, with Neymar in the squad, but human nature, they were very, very unlikely to help Barca out in any way. So it was a shambolic setup, and it had big repercussions in the squad.
Now, Real Madrid did get a good result at the weekend, Richard. They won 1-0 away to Sevilla. But last Wednesday in the Champions League against PSG, they were beaten 3-0 and they looked very, very poor indeed. So Zidane has his own problems, and he's reduced to playing Gareth Bale, which is something he didn't want to do. The situation in Madrid, how sort of unstable is it? And what about Eden Hazard? I believe he hasn't impressed so far.
No, one day Zidane, another day Valverde, as someone said here. Zidane is under a lot of pressure. He put down his most difficult week in his 2 stints as Real Madrid manager, following that defeat at Paris Saint-Germain, or in Paris. I mean, they were overrun, in particular in that space between midfield and defence, 3-0. They didn't get a shot on target. This is the first time in 580 games odd that they didn't get a shot on target, almost a decade. So they were flaccid, really limp. But Zidane, this is the way he operates. He kept faith, as Alfredo Rolano, the president of Diario AS, one of the sports papers here, says he kept faith with the same 11 little bastards for that game against Sevilla. The only difference was Sergio Ramos came back from suspension into defence, but they buckled down, and he castigated the players after the defeat in Paris for their lack of intensity. They did have intensity against Sevilla. It was a notable win because that stadium, the Sancho Pizjuan, is a graveyard for Real Madrid and travelling teams. It was the first time Real Madrid had won there, or they had been beaten in their last 4 visits there. Sevilla were top of the table before they kicked off.
Yeah.
So it was a good win for Zidane, but it's difficult. It's difficult to see how it's sustainable, because he won't get that performance. He players like Bale, Hazard, James Rodriguez put in good shifts in defence, but they won't do that for 40 games a season. The squad is set up really badly. They've only got 4 pure midfielders. Modric is injured at the moment. If Casemiro, the only holding midfielder, gets injured, they're goosed. So he was playing with James Rodriguez as a midfielder, and James Rodriguez is not a midfielder. No. He's great in attack. But you can imagine him up against Man City or Liverpool. So that's a big structural problem Zidane has in his squad. But I mean, the league title is up for grabs. Barcelona, as we've talked about, are in dire straits. Atletico have had 2 poor results. So it's only between those 2-3 for the league title. So, who knows, if Real Madrid could get a bit of momentum. They'll, have easy enough league games to come. So, they're in the mix. And then in the Champions League, it's a knockout competition. So they'll be competitive in that for one-off games.
Now, Richard, in Spain, the television rights, we don't, no English channel has the right to show the Spanish games. No free-to-air, of course, but even pay-per-view, it's tricky, if indeed it's possible at all. The television money from Spain, is it distributed equally among all the clubs? Depending on points, and that you get more for more points, of course. But as it is in the Premier League, even the bottom club will get something like 150 million. It's not like that in Spain, is it?
Yeah, it's a very interesting area. They did amend the payment structure a few years ago. Javier Tebas came in as president of the league about 5 or 6 years ago, and he hammered through this deal through Parliament. He got it enshrined in law, where the money would be distributed more equitably.
Yeah.
So we have seen like 6-7 years ago, Barca and Madrid were winning league titles with 100 points. That isn't happening anymore. There is a shortening of the gap between the bottom clubs and the big clubs. But it's still a big gulf, bigger than it would be in the English Premier League. And also, obviously, the pot isn't as big for Spanish clubs. And that's where all the money is these days in TV, rather than match day income.
Now, we read in the English press of a possibility that Zidane, I understand, if they sack him, they've got to pay him 80 million. Is that right?
Yeah, he has a clause there,
yeah. Now, Pochettino, the Spurs coach, has been linked repeatedly with the Real Madrid job. He said that he would never take the Barcelona job because he played, I think, and coached Espanyol, the second team in Barcelona. But the uncertainty and the instability at Madrid would leave Zidane in a precarious position. Although we have to remember, don't we, that this is a coach who won 3 successive Champions League, something that had never been done before, even at Real Madrid in the Champions League era, not the European Cup, of course, which they won 5 times on a spin.
Absolutely. I mean, Zidane would have no illusions about his position. The history of Real Madrid managers is a long one with lots of names and short-term careers. Even when he was in that job the first time, his neck was on the line. He came in mid-season to replace Rafa Benitez, who was sacked. Rafa Benitez didn't even get to tell the players goodbye. He was just out the door. Zidane comes in mid-season. He dragged them to a Champions League final, but if he lost that Champions League final, he would have been replaced in the summer. Again, in his third and final season, in his first stint, they were atrocious in the league. If they didn't win that Champions League final against Liverpool,
yes,
it's unlikely he would have continued in the job. This time round, he was under ferocious pressure last week after that humiliating defeat to Paris Saint-Germain. It's not an accident when names get leaked or get discussed in the press, particularly Jose Mourinho. He did an interview. Xabi Alonso is up at Real Sociedad running their youth academy. He's been touted as a possible successor. And you mentioned Pochettino as well. And so all those guys will be in the frame. They also have Raúl, who's working in the youth academy at Real Madrid, a Real Madrid legend, who would have a similar profile to Zidane, ex-player and no experience managing at the top. But hey, throw him in there and see what happens. So Zidane knows that his position is precarious. He hasn't covered himself in glory in the 6 months he's been back. During the summer, we remember the shambles around the Bale situation. He wanted Bale out, couldn't get him out.
And most importantly and revealingly to our eyes, he wants Paul Pogba in.
Yeah, he did. It was the one signing he insisted on. There was circumstances beyond his control, namely the price that Manchester United were looking for Pogba. But he did have reason in that we mentioned earlier that Real Madrid have no midfield at the moment. They have 4 players, 4 central midfielders. So somebody like Pogba, the sticking point was the price they were looking for him, but they needed somebody in midfield to shake up the team. A senior player that Zidane likes, that kind of style of player, box-to-box player, much like his own profile as a player. But it didn't happen, and now he's effectively got one hand tied behind his back because, as I mentioned, I don't think it's sustainable that he'll be able to play James Rodriguez, for example, in midfield for the rest of the season.
Okay, just a final question about the strength of these 2 great clubs and indeed the league. This great league that has been so powerful in the history of European football. It wouldn't be a bad move if you were having a bet on the Champions League to put a line through Barcelona and Real Madrid as things stand at present, Richard.
Yeah, you'd have to, given the evidence, you'd have to say so. The only thing I would say is that, of those 3 Champions League titles that Zidane won on the trot, they weren't impressive domestically, Real Madrid, those seasons, except the middle one. The Champions League has been a lottery for the last 6 or 7 years since Chelsea won back in 2012. It's very, very hard to predict the winner. So we know it'll come to the last 16 quarter final. It'll be the same 6 or 7 names in there, and it'll be up for grabs. But they aren't. Neither of the teams look strong at the moment. But February, March is a long time away yet.
Okay, Richard. Thank you very much for joining us.